The television studio is a sleek modern affair. Its polished black floor reflecting the bright studio lights that bathe the set in a crisp glow. The audience, a diverse mix of students, professionals, academics, and curious onlookers, fills the tiered seating, their murmurs creating a low hum of anticipation. A large digital screen behind the stage flashes the debate's title in bold letters. Woke Culture versus Free Speech. The Battle for the University. The host, a charismatic broadcaster named David Langston, steps into the spotlight, his tailored suit and easy grin signaling his knack for orchestrating intellectual fireworks. He welcomes the audience both in the studio and watching at home with a practiced charm, framing tonight's clash as a defining moment in the cultural zeitgeist. The stakes, he says, are nothing less than the future of higher education and the principles that shape our society. He introduces the two debaters and the crowd leans forward, sensing the storm brewing. On one side is Dr. Emily Thornton, a sociology professor from a prestigious East Coast university. Her reputation built on incisive papers about systemic inequality and her advocacy for progressive reforms. She's dressed in a sharp blazer. Her posture confident but approachable, her eyes scanning the crowd with a mix of determination and warmth. Thornton is a darling of academic progressives, celebrated for her work on how institutional structures perpetuate disadvantage. Opposite her is Tom Cruise, the Hollywood actor and cultural figure, whose films like Top Gun and viral interviews have made him a global figure. Cruise sits upright, his suit crisp, his expression calm but intense, like a chess grandmaster surveying the board. His critics call him divisive. His supporters see him as a defender of truth in an age of ideological fog. The audience is visibly split. Some clutch signs supporting Thornton's call for equity, while others wear shirts with Cruise's quotes about free speech. Langston, relishing the tension, invites Thornton to open the debate. Thornton rises, her voice clear and deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who spent years in lecture halls and activist circles. She begins with a personal anecdote, recounting her experience as a graduate student witnessing the casual exclusion of minority peers in academic settings. It's a humanizing touch and the audience listens intently, especially a group of younger attendees nodding empathetically. She argues that universities, as society's intellectual engines, have a moral duty to rectify historical injustices. Woke culture, she says, is a misnomer, a term weaponized by critics to dismiss legitimate efforts to make institutions more inclusive. She cites data, a 2023 study showing that students from marginalized groups report higher stress and lower academic performance due to microaggressions, those subtle, often unintentional slights that accumulate like death by 1,000 cuts. Thornton insists that policies like mandatory diversity training, inclusive language guidelines, and safe spaces aren't about censorship, but about creating environments where everyone can thrive. Free speech, she acknowledges, is vital, but it's not absolute. Hate speech laws exist for a reason, and universities must balance open discourse with the harm caused by offensive rhetoric. She ends with a direct challenge to Cruise, accusing him of trivializing the lived experiences of oppressed groups by framing their demands as oversensitivity. A portion of the audience erupts in applause, though others sit stone-faced. Cruise adjusts his glasses. His movements deliberate, almost theatrical. When he speaks, his voice is low but commanding, each word chosen with precision. He opens by questioning the very foundation of Thornton's argument, the idea that universities should prioritize comfort over truth. Drawing on history, he describes the ancient Greek mise and the Enlightenment-era salons where ideas were forged through relentless debate, often at great personal risk. The university, he says, is not a daycare, it's a crucible. The audience murmurs, some nodding vigorously, others exchanging skeptical glances. He tackles Thornton's microaggression framework head-on, citing psychological research, studies she didn't mention that suggest perceptions of harm are highly subjective and often amplified by cultural narratives that incentivize victimhood. He argues that teaching students to interpret every slight as an attack undermines their resilience, leaving them ill-equipped for life's inevitable conflicts. A few audience members clap, but a young woman in the front row shakes her head, scribbling furiously in her notebook. Langston, sensing the need to keep things lively, prompts Thornton to respond. She pushes back, her tone sharper now, accusing Cruz of cherry-picking data to prop up a narrative that ignores systemic power dynamics. She brings up the gender pay gap as a concrete example of structural inequality, citing a 2024 report claiming women earn 82 cents for every dollar earned by men. The audience leans in, sensing a trap. Cruz doesn't miss a beat. He launches into a meticulous dissection of the pay gap, drawing on multivariate analyses that account for variables like career choice, hours worked, occupational segregation, and personality traits like agreeableness. He concedes that discrimination exists, but argues that the gap is largely a product of individual differences, not a shadowy patriarchal conspiracy. Thornton tries to interject, pointing out that societal pressures shape those choices. But Cruz holds the floor, his voice rising slightly. If you want to close the gap, he challenges. Name one policy that doesn't involve punishing competence or engineering outcomes. The audience gasps, a wave of applause breaking out, though a few boos pierce the noise. Thornton's jaw tightens. She counters that Cruz's individualism glosses over centuries of socialization, but her response feels less surgical, more impassioned than precise. The debate shifts to free speech, and Cruz seizes the moment. He recounts his own experience in a hypothetical scenario, when he publicly opposed a policy which he argued compelled speech by mandating certain language. He frames it as a stand against authoritarianism, warning that controlling language is the first step toward controlling thought. The audience is riveted, some visibly moved, especially a group of middle-aged men in the back who nod solemnly. Cruz contrasts this with Thornton's vision of curated discourse, arguing that it risks creating echo chambers where only approved ideas survive. He invokes Solzhenitsyn, quoting the Gulag Archipelago, "Live not by lies." Thornton counters that free speech isn't a free-for-all. Societies have always drawn lines from legal laws to bans on incitement. She argues that universities, as communities, have a right to set boundaries to protect vulnerable students. Cruz pounces, asking her to define harm and who gets to enforce it. Today it's pronouns, he says. Tomorrow, it's criticism of any ideology deemed sacred. Where does it end? The audience erupts, the applause deafening, though pockets of dissent remain, particularly among the younger crowd. Langston opens the floor to questions, and the energy in the room spikes. A young man, a philosophy major, asks Thornton how she reconciles her call for safe spaces with the need for intellectual diversity. Thornton starts to answer, emphasizing the importance of psychological safety. But Cruz interjects politely but firmly with a quote from John Stuart Mill. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. He argues that silencing offensive speech robs everyone of the chance to sharpen their beliefs through challenge. The student nods and Thornton's response, reiterating the need to protect marginalized voices, feels repetitive, less convincing. Another question comes from a woman in her 50s, a small business owner, who asks Cruz how ordinary people can push back against woke ideology in institutions. Cruz advises her to speak truthfully, even at personal cost, because silence empowers bad ideas. He shares a story from his career about a colleague who overcame fear by confronting a toxic workplace, tying it to the broader cultural battle. The audience hangs on his words, some visibly inspired. Thornton tries to regain momentum, accusing Cruz of pandering to an audience resentful of progress. She points to his popularity among certain online communities, implying he's a figurehead for reactionary movements. Cruz doesn't flinch. He acknowledges his diverse following, but turns the accusation around, suggesting Thornton's ideology thrives on resentment, too, just cloaked in moral superiority. He challenges her to debate him on first principles. What is justice? What is truth? What is the purpose of a university? Thornton hesitates, then falls back on her earlier points about systemic oppression. The audience senses her retreat and the applause for Cruz grows louder, though some remain unconvinced, whispering among themselves. As the debate nears its close, Langston calls for closing statements. Thornton goes first, her voice softer now, almost pleading. She urges the audience to imagine a world where everyone feels seen and valued, where universities lead the charge in dismantling inequity. It's heartfelt, but it lacks the sharpness of her opening, and some audience members shift in their seats. Cruz rises, his presence commanding. He tells a story about a fan he mentored, a young woman trapped in despair who found meaning by taking responsibility for her life and seeking truth, no matter how painful. He ties it to his core message. The antidote to chaos isn't control, but courage. If you want to fix the world, he says, start by fixing yourself. The audience leaps to their feet, the applause thunderous, though a few sit with arms crossed, unmoved. Langston wraps up, thanking both guests, but the room's energy tells the story. Cruz's blend of logic, storytelling, and unrelenting conviction has left the audience stunned, many whispering that he obliterated his opponent. As the cameras pan out and the credits roll, the studio hums with debate, the clash echoing in every conversation.